Hey everyone, it is Exposing Mold here. I am trying to go live on Instagram, so give me 2 seconds. Okay, perfect. So I'm Alicia Swami. I'm here with my co-host Keely Severson, Eric Johnson. We're exposing mold, and today we're talking about mold competitors, the competition madness that is the mold industry and other mold experts bad mouthing us or bad mouthing each other, or just the whole situation of what's going on in the mold community these days. And we just wanted to hit some things head on. So, Eric, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to you and let you lead this discussion.
Well, having been present at the origin of the Epstein-Barr virus syndrome paradigm, I got to see how people approach this problem. This was years before chronic fatigue syndrome and many years before mold illness, but a strange adult mono reactivation of Epstein-Barr virus was rolling around the country and creating a lot of problems. Wound up in the news all over the place as the yuppie flu. And then it finally struck my little village at North Lake Tahoe, Incline Village. And I got swept up in this because I became ill with this flu-like illness and got to watch everybody approach this situation, all the researchers that heard about our outbreak and descended on Incline and started bickering with each other. And I saw a really unusual competition emerge between researchers, where everybody came with their own preconceived notions, their ideas, their theories, the things that they wanted to impress upon the situation without actually studying it. They just arrived looking for something that would reinforce whatever they wanted to have other people believe or whatever product they wanted to sell. And they did this for the EBV. Within a week, maybe less, of hearing about the outbreak, the flu that never goes away, the Epstein-Barr virus, the mystery disease, experts emerged from everywhere, all claiming that they had the answers. They didn't even know what the question was. They didn't know that there was an EBV serology test that unveiled an aberrant profile of EBV reactivation, which is not something that happens in any normal, healthy adult. They just said, oh, you've got the adult mono, you got the kissing disease. I've got all the supplements and all the cures. So within a very short period of time, we were overwhelmed with people who had all the cures and they didn't even know what the disease was. So I got to witness this competition for the EBV. And then, of course, Dr. Paul Cheney and Dr. Peterson uncovered evidence that EBV was not the driving force in our outbreak. There was something else, another virus. They discovered a new human herpes virus 6, a completely different thing. In fact, you could have what appeared to be the identical EBV disease, but no EBV at all. So this threw a real wrench into the product sellers for the EBV, because they were saying this addresses the EBV specifically, and that wasn't exactly what was going on. So the CDC was compelled by our evidence to create a new syndrome that didn't implicate Epstein-Barr virus. They gave it a really stupid name because they don't like this disease. When you act like you're sick from anything and everything, they want nothing to do with you. It's like you're a toxic soup person. You just need to buck up, take better care of yourself. They did not want to deal with people who just complain about everything that's bugging them, which is what sick people often do when they start reacting to all kinds of stuff. So they gave the syndrome a really stupid name because they actually wanted people to bicker about it. That was their means of dealing with it. Okay, here you go. Here's your stupid syndrome. Fight yourselves to death. And that's exactly what people did. Cures for chronic fatigue syndrome from everywhere. They didn't even come back and find out what the problem was. They didn't ask the first question. They went out of their way to avoid finding out that there were tests for the EBV. There were activated viral infections which were associated with the mystery illness. They didn't want to know any of that because it interfered with their product line. whatever what they wanted people to sell. So given this, I had a pretty good idea when the mold illness emerged in the early 1990s that it was going to be the same thing all over again. And I hope to use the awareness of mold at ground zero for chronic fatigue syndrome to head this off, get top researchers involved, get real science behind this thing before the charlatans, quacks, product sellers, ambitious entrepreneurs, all the people that have the instant cures leaped in to sell their products. So I did my best to approach all the top doctors, everybody that even remotely got interested in the toxic mold phenomenon. I contacted them and said, you got to get us established before this turns into a massive competition with everybody competing for market share. But they were too powerful. They out-publicized the need for real science, and they got out there with their air filters and their binders and their supplements and all the brain retraining and all the crap that they had to sell. And they completely overwhelmed any serious research that was going on. So I took people on the mold tour. The prominent advocates, Jen Brea, Julie Rehmeyer, an early one, Mike Desson, Deborah Woroff of MECFS Alert. I took these people on the mold tour to the sick places and go, here's the deal. People with this flu-like illness that got exposed to toxic mold, they're the ones who turned into chronic cases of illness, which were later called chronic fatigue syndrome. So let's just look at the facts, and found out that people did not want these facts to be known. They wanted to become a big name in their own right, a leading advocate, a thought leader, somebody who was going to influence everybody else. And they deliberately omitted this evidence so it would naturally force more attention onto themselves. So this became an integrity test as well as a scientific endeavor. When a top advocate in any paradigm encounters research that is vital to resolution of that paradigm and withholds evidence, manipulates it, lets it out slowly for their own purposes, then you're seeing somebody who's allowed the desire to pursue their own agenda overcome any pangs of morality or integrity they might otherwise feel. So that's what we've seen here is people, especially in the MECFS world, who are told about evidence that is vital for any researcher to know if they want to understand what chronic fatigue syndrome is all about. If they encounter this evidence, fail to pass this on, they're manipulators. So that's why I refer to this as a mold competition, because now we've got all these people that are competing for market share. They're not collaborating. They're not putting their power together to create a strong political faction. They're not even calling for top researchers to get involved. They're jumping in with all the answers. So that's my message here is when you see people who behave other than an expert would, somebody who manipulates and withholds information rather than trying to work together, somebody's out there clearly looking for market share rather than going to the top institutes, that's when you've got a red flag for somebody who's trying to, well, what's in your wallet?
So I want to break down what's been going on with Jen Brea, Julie Rehmeyer. I don't know if I pronounced her name, Rehmeyer. What's going on with these folks currently in the MECFS realm?
Well, they came to Incline Village, learned about the toxic mold phenomenon, how it started the syndrome, exactly how it played out with the sick buildings, realized that they too were reactive to mold, and may have vaguely mentioned it once or twice, but let it get glossed over so that they could become a power player in the MECFS world, but at the same time, not being forthcoming about where they learned it, how they learned it, how important it is to them, and specifically how this was the direct mystery that baffled Dr. Gary Holmes into coining chronic fatigue syndrome. So omitting information of that nature is clearly construed to stop other people from knowing something so they could come back to the origin of chronic fatigue syndrome and reach their own conclusions.
I need a fire over here too. Is someone building a fire at your house, Eric?
Pardon, I didn't hear you.
I said, is somebody building a fire at your house?
Somebody is.
I'm cold too. Send them my way.
It's 4 degrees. Well, it moved up to 8, but it was really cold this morning. So yeah, we got to stoke up the fire.
Is that my best friend, Bob?
Yes, it is.
Hey, Bob.
Keely says hi.
He's like, bah, humbug, Keely.
No, he says hi.
Oh, okay, good.
So anyway, that's what it's all about, is we're trying to convey to these top researchers and top advocates and big names that they have a social duty, a responsibility to pass along what they know. And instead of doing so, they turn around and say, you're attacking us. Perhaps, in a way, it is harsh criticism, but their behavior deserves harsh criticism.
We see this on the microcosm of trying to correct any information that wasn't relayed accurately from the source. It seems like anytime we try to correct anything or straighten out anything that we perceive as not correct historically or not correct in the world of mold avoidance, we are definitely hated and called bullies. So I guess I'm kind of curious as to what the sociological phenomenon is that doesn't allow for correction.
I call it greed. Gotta ream everybody every day. It's pure greed.
Wow, I didn't know you had that little one up your sleeve. That was nice.
Well, they turn it into a personal attack instead of sticking with the information. They inject emotion, and then they blame you that it's because no one is paying attention to you, Eric. You're bitter. You're tyrannical. You're going on these rants, but it's like you're trying to bring out the truth of what's happening in these situations of what we're seeing, sort of like what Jen Bray and Julie are doing with CCI, right? They're sort of trying to put that at the forefront when there's whole other evidence of why ME and CFS has even occurred, and that's not even being looked at or taken into consideration. And it's like these runaway agendas just sort of take on the life of their own. And then these people become the spokesmodels when we never ask them to. We don't want them to because they're not doing the right thing at the end of the day. So it's just a crazy situation when we call this out because people are, again, trying to get personal with it when we're not trying to be personal with it. We're trying to stick to the facts. And Eric has always been that way. And so when you see people provide these personal attacks or whatever, Eric is bitter, it's just a bunch of crap to try to dissuade from what is actually happening.
And of course, tethered cord and CCI and Chiari malformation are important, but these weren't documented in whatever it was that Gary Holmes and the CDC were looking at. So you need a reason in science to introduce another variable. Now, it's very possible that the neuroinflammation from toxic mold could set the stage for all these problems. But to put it in context, you need to start at the beginning, look at when people first started getting ill, follow the progress through the course of their disease, and see what develops. Did it turn into a neurological illness? And is CCI and tether cord an outcome of this kind of exposure? If you put a timeline on it, you can do that. But if you start with these advocates and act like they were the first person to bring up a problem, there is no context to place this into the framework of ME or CFS.
Yeah, that's something that people always either intentionally gloss over or reject. But there's history, there's historical clues that you can trace back, and it's when the evidence gets buried, then how can you trace that back to take a look at how that proceeded?
Yeah, when I say mold at ground zero for chronic fatigue syndrome, that puts a timeline on it. If somebody diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome says, "Oh, I react to mold," the doctor's going to go, "Well, of course, you're sick. You react to everything." So that creates no impetus, no impulse to find out what this random variable has to do with chronic fatigue syndrome. But if you know that the people with the mystery illness that chronic fatigue syndrome was going to solve were exposed to toxic mold before they developed this chronic illness, that timeline changes everything. You know that this mold set the stage for what happened later.
What's your opinion on the combination of terms ME/CFS as if it's...
Well, ME and CFS were both based on contagious flu-like illness outbreaks. Each name was devised to separate this scary outbreak situation from sporadic cases which look very much the same. The difference is the scary outbreaks got the attention, so that gets a reaction from the authorities, whereas the sporadic cases do not. So the idea with a new name, both in the case of ME and CFS, was this was scary enough to dredge some kind of response out of the CDC, NIH, and in Britain, the National Health Service back in the day, 1955. And it worked. But when it was diluted by mixing it in with the sporadic cases, the scare disappeared. So that's where it started to break down in terms of what these terms are applied to. And the suspected cause of the Royal Free 1955 outbreak was an enterovirus. Well, that's a different data set than what scared the Holmes Committee into convening and creating chronic fatigue syndrome, which is a flu-like illness associated with human herpes virus 6. Two different viruses. Any scientist will tell you immediately, not the same, different data sets. So if you use the ME/CFS term with it in your mind that they're similar but not the same, and you've got to retain the separation, you can proceed in a scientific manner. But if you say, "Oh, that's just another name for fatigue from anything and everything," then all you did was make ME/CFS just as meaningless and useless as the old neurasthenia term was.
Yeah, it's really weird how they lump them together as if they're like the same thing when, like you said, they're two separate things.
And there again, it's all greed. It's all because they want numbers. They're going for market share. And if you can spin a lot of confusion, create a smokescreen, you get more people and more profit. And they're putting profit over science.
And they're lumping what now, long COVID into it? So
Right.
they can get all that COVID funding.
That's right. They're looking for a whole new market, draw in something else and create even more confusion for another class of people who obviously have a much different virus than either ME or CFS had.
What's funny to me is when people like to say, "Oh, advocates are doing their best. They're trying to be amicable with the NIH." The NIH knows nothing about this, and their doctors and the researchers know nothing. And so if we can be gentle with them, maybe they'll listen to us and do what we want them to do. What's your response to that?
Yeah, as long as you will allow somebody to pretend that they're confused and they have a vested interest in having you believe that, they're going to continue to pretend to be confused. They know all about it. These are scientists. These aren't stupid people. They are aware of the manipulation that they're doing to create this smokescreen that allows the quacks and the charlatans to profit, and they're just standing by and watching it happen.
So what did Dr. Elizabeth Unger tell you, the head of the ME/CFS research division of the NIH, when you approached her with the information of mold and CFS?
Well, she said how interesting that was, and asked me, are the buildings still making people sick? And I guess, yes, they are. In fact, some of those patients are right here in Dr. Peterson's practice. You can walk across the room and ask them right now. And, oh, so I said, well, now that you're interested in the toxic mold phenomenon, this is a great opportunity for the CDC to redeem themselves because none of the chronic fatigue syndrome researchers have looked into this. If the CDC were to step up now, do their duty, and talk about this, solve the mystery, I'm sure all past sins will be forgiven. At least somebody's trying to do something about this situation. And I offered Dr. Unger the chance to put the CDC in the lead of mold and CFS investigation by bringing out this evidence. And I think Dr. Unger really wanted to do that. She seemed very interested, almost agreeable, very smart. I like Dr. Unger. She picked up on this instantly. No questions that she fully understands the situation, but I think she went back to Atlanta and ran it past by her superiors and was told not to do it because I got an email thanking me, but saying no further information is necessary at this time. And that was 8 years ago, and there's been no response. So that was clearly a decision on their part not to pursue mold at ground zero for chronic fatigue syndrome.
What have been the responses of, the other institutes that you've approached, like Whittemore Peterson, the Open Medicine Foundation, Solve Me? What have they all responded to when you've provided this information to them? I know that we've attended some of their advocacy meetings, right? And they've Solve Me said, well, if it's not in the literature, then we can't help you. It's like, okay, well, we're trying to discover something new here. Anyways, what have all these institutes responded to you with?
Well, they clearly see the original chronic fatigue syndrome incident, the original cohort, as an interference to whatever they want to play with, whatever new technology, whatever theories they happen to have. We're an interference. That's why no doctor or researcher has ever done an investigation into the original incident that Dr. Gary Holmes outlined in his 1987 abstract. Because the moment they see that there's something definite for them to look into, they don't want to be constrained by having to conform to our evidence. So they simply make sure not to see it. And all the institutes that I've presented this to have behaved in exactly the same way. That doesn't matter anymore. We've moved on since then. We've redefined CFS. Oh, so you redefined it so it's not CFS anymore, just so it can fit whatever you want your theory to be. And that's not science, that's science fraud.
How important is this information to patients? Like if they came out and they looked at this and they were able to solve it, like what would that do for the patient community?
Every day, I hear of more people who are diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, but never told about human herpes virus 6, never told about the toxic mold. It was as if they just gave them a vague, stupid, meaningless name, and they suffered with no answers, no direction, nowhere to get any help, just going from doctor to doctor, selling them endless supplements and bogus cures. So yeah, this has created a great deal of damage, suffering, financial hardship for people who could have had the answers that mold illness patients are only now discovering, which could have been known and should have been known over 30 years ago.
The impact is so far reaching. It's really disconcerting to see people suffering and not have information that they could have had a long time ago. And it's also disconcerting to see the patient community and these advocates and their behavior as well when they find out this information, like Jen and Julie, to just go on their own tangent and try to build their own platforms based upon what's ailing them or whatever. It's such a weird situation because not only do you have deception in, the people that we're supposed to trust and these leaders, the researchers, the doctors, but There's a lot of weird stuff happening in the patient community, especially with patient advocates. That is inexplicable to me.
Well, it's certainly explainable from the greed factor, but not from a integrity and science-based perspective. And I believe that you can actually look at any mold expert, any CFA, any expert in any category. If anybody claims to be an expert in any field, what's an expert do? They are fascinated by their own subject matter. They want to know the history, where it first developed, the timeline. Anything they don't know, they want to know. So if you can present anything to an expert in any field of which they're unaware and they are not interested, well, you're seeing an agenda-based program here that is designed to suppress rather than elucidate. So there's your red flag.
Well, I guess only time will tell how this continues. So from then on, we'll keep doing what we're doing, right, Eric?
Yep. Exposing.
Exposing. What did Cat Williams, that crazy viral video, call the 2024 the year of reckoning? And we're continuing on that reckoning, exposing mold and ME/CFS and all of that. So it's going to be a very interesting year. So everyone stay tuned, and we'll see you guys next time. You good, Eric? Oh, did you have the last words? That was so rude of me.
Just be mold free.
Try to be mold free. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.